All right, so we're diving into the world of Saadya Gaon, this prominent Jewish philosopher, theologian, and just all-around intellectual powerhouse from the 10th century, a time of like incredible intellectual ferment. And, you send over a stack of fascinating material about him, and just from what I'm gathering, he wasn't just a philosopher, right? He was also a rabbi, a commentator on the Bible, a grammarian, even a mathematician. It's really impressive.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable the range of his interests and accomplishments.
Yeah, and what really strikes me is how, through it all, he seems to be wrestling with this fundamental question. How do we reconcile faith and reason?
Well, that's a question that has preoccupied philosophers and theologians for centuries. And what's particularly interesting about Sadia is that he wasn't content to simply keep these two realms separate. He actively sought to bridge them, to demonstrate how reason could illuminate faith and how faith could provide a foundation for a meaningful life guided by reason.
It's like he was trying to build a system where these two, like, seemingly opposed forces could coexist and even reinforce each other.
That's a great way to put it. He saw them as complementary rather than contradictory.
Okay, so where do we even begin to unpack this? This is a huge question.
Well, a great starting point is his major philosophical work, the Book of Doctrines and Beliefs, or Amana in Arabic. This wasn't just some abstract philosophical treatise. Sadia wrote it with a clear purpose, to combat what he saw as the errors and doubt plaguing people, hindering them from leading truly fulfilling lives. He wanted to equip them with the tools of reason and the certainty of faith to navigate the complexities of existence.
So it's like a guidebook for living a good life, grounded in both intellectual inquiry and religious conviction.
Exactly. It's a practical philosophy aimed at helping people live well.
Hmm.
And to understand how he brings these two together, we need to delve into his four ways of knowing: sense perception, reason, inference, and something he calls tradition.
Okay, now the first three, those sound pretty familiar. Classic ways we gain knowledge about the world, right? But tradition, as a distinct category of knowledge, that's intriguing.
It is, right. It's not just about customs or rituals passed down through generations. For Sadia, tradition represents a kind of knowledge that's received all at once, with immediate certainty. He uses the Arabic word al-kabar, which literally means a report, to emphasize the inherent reliability of this kind of knowledge. It's like receiving a trustworthy report from a reliable source, bypassing the need for step-by-step reasoning.
Oh, so it's almost like a shortcut to knowledge, a way of accessing truths that have been verified and passed down through generations.
That's a great way to think about it.
But then how does this concept of tradition connect to revelation, which usually seems like a much more like individual and sudden burst of insight?
Here's where Sadia's deep understanding of language comes into play. The Arabic word he uses for revelation is se'elat, and it comes from the root to hear. It literally means things that are heard.
Wait, so revelation for Sadia is fundamentally about hearing, not some abstract unveiling of hidden truths, but actually listening to something.
You got it. And this linguistic connection reveals a profound link between tradition and revelation in his thought. Think about it. Prophecy, which is a form of revelation, involves the prophet hearing the divine word. That word is then passed down through tradition, becoming a source of knowledge for future generations.
So both tradition and revelation, at their core, rely on this act of hearing, of receiving knowledge from a trusted source. It's like a chain of transmission, with each link adding to the reliability of the information.
That's a great analogy.
This is fascinating. Okay, so prophecy fits into this hearing framework as well, right?
Absolutely. But Saidia's view of prophecy goes beyond just the auditory experience. He talks about the prophet receiving both a created word, which is what they hear, and a created glory, which is what they see.
Created glory. Now that sounds like something straight out of like a mystical vision.
It definitely has that mystical flavor. What's fascinating is that this created glory acts as a kind of verification for the prophet's experience, confirming that what they're hearing is genuinely from a divine source.
So it's like a divine stamp of approval.
Exactly. Now, there's some debate about what this created glory actually is. Some scholars suggest it might be a kind of cosmic intermediary, a manifestation of God's presence in the world, perhaps even a created thing, shay makhluk in Arabic.
Oh, wow. Adding another layer of complexity to this whole idea of revelation. But even with these like mystical elements, Sadia seems to be grounding his understanding of prophecy in this concrete act of hearing and seeing, like linking it back to those foundational ways of knowing.
Right. And this emphasis on tangible experience is crucial for understanding his approach to the relationship between reason and revelation, especially when we get into his discussion of different kinds of laws.
Ah, yes. The famous distinction between laws of reason and laws of revelation, a concept that's had a profound impact on Jewish thought.
For Saadya, this distinction was central to understanding the nature of God's commands and how we as humans are meant to live in accordance with them.
Okay, let's break this down. So, laws of reason are those moral principles that seem self-evident, like the prohibitions against murder, theft, lying. They're kind of like universal moral truths that any rational person could arrive at, right?
Precisely. They're ingrained in our very nature, accessible through our faculty of reason. On the other hand, laws of revelation are those commands that don't have an immediately obvious reason behind them.
Like the dietary laws in Judaism, or the specific rituals associated with observing the Sabbath.
Exactly. These laws require acceptance through faith because their rationale might not be fully graspable through reason alone. They're based on divine command, on the word that's been heard and passed down through tradition.
Which makes sense, right? Like there are some things that just inherently feel wrong, like harming others, and then there are those rules and rituals that seem to come from a higher authority.
It's about recognizing different sources of authority and knowledge.
But here's what always kind of tripped me up about this distinction. If these laws of reason are so obvious, why would God even bother including them in Revelation? Like, wouldn't it be redundant?
That's a great question, and it gets to the heart of Saadya's project of reconciling reason and revelation. He actually offers a couple of really insightful explanations for this apparent redundancy.
I am all ears.
First, he argues that God, in his infinite benevolence, essentially gave humanity a moral shortcut by revealing these laws of reason. Sure, we could eventually figure out that murder and theft are wrong, but why risk the chaos and suffering that might result from trial and error? Revelation provides those clear-cut guidelines from the start, a kind of divine cheat sheet for moral behavior.
Well, it's like a cosmic safety net, ensuring that humanity has a clear moral compass from the get-go. I like that. What's the other reason?
This one is even more ingenious, I think. Saadya suggests that by making those laws of reason part of divine command, God actually elevates their significance. We get extra credit, so to speak, for acting morally, even if those actions seem inherently good.
So even those self-evident moral actions become acts of obedience and devotion to God when we understand them as part of his revealed will. That's a fascinating way to look at it.
It really highlights how Saadya saw reason and revelation working together, each enriching and elevating the other. But things get even more interesting when we look at how he approaches those laws of revelation that seem so arbitrary to our human reason.
You're telling me he tries to find a rational explanation for the seemingly irrational? That sounds like a real challenge.
It is, and it reveals the inherent tension in Saadya's project. Even though he explicitly states that human reason can't fully grasp the rationale behind these laws, he still tries to find some kind of logical explanation for them.
It's like the philosopher in him just can't resist trying to find the underlying logic, even when dealing with matters of faith.
Exactly, and it's in these moments that we see the true brilliance and complexity of Saadya's thought.
So what kind of explanations does he offer for these laws of revelation? Give me an example.
For instance, take the dietary laws in Judaism. Saadya suggests that they might be in place to prevent people from worshiping animals, maintaining a clear separation between the creator and the created.
Interesting. So he's trying to find a deeper purpose behind these seemingly arbitrary rules, connecting them to broader theological concepts.
Precisely. And this raises a really important question. Is Saadya ultimately saying that everything in Revelation can be explained by reason if we just think hard enough?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Is he ultimately a rationalist who manages to fit even the most mystical elements of faith into a neat, reason-based system? Or is there something more going on here?
Well, that's a question we'll have to explore further as we delve deeper into Saadya's thought.
So we've been exploring this whole idea of Saadya Gaon, attempting to reconcile reason and revelation. And it's been fascinating. He's got this intricate system where he uses reason to understand and even justify aspects of revelation. But it does make you wonder, is reason truly independent in his system? Or is it ultimately serving to just reinforce, pre-existing beliefs?
It's a question that gets to the heart of the debate surrounding Saadya's work. I mean, it's tempting to see him as this champion of reason, demonstrating that even the most seemingly irrational aspects of faith can be understood through logic. But some scholars argue that he sometimes falls into the trap of what later Jewish philosophers called pseudo-reasoning.
Pseudo-reasoning. Okay, I need a little more explanation on that one. What does that even mean?
Well, essentially, it's the idea that you're starting with a conclusion. In this case, a belief that's rooted in revelation, and then you kind of bend logic to fit that predetermined conclusion. Rather than using reason as a neutral tool for inquiry, you're using it to justify what you already believe.
So it's like a kind of intellectual confirmation bias.
Exactly. And this is where some critics of Saadya argue that his attempts to find rational explanations for laws of revelation might be more about reinforcing his own convictions than about genuinely exploring the potential harmony between reason and revelation.
Hmm. It does make you wonder. Even when he's advocating for reason, he's constantly in scriptural support for his arguments. It's like he's saying, look, even the Bible itself validates the use of reason. But that reliance on Scripture as the ultimate authority, well, that kind of speaks volumes about the role of revelation in his thinking.
Right. It raises the question, is reason truly an independent force in his system, or is it ultimately subordinate to revelation? It's a debate that scholars continue to have, and it speaks to the enduring complexity of Saadya's work.
Yeah, it's definitely adding some nuance to this whole picture of Saadya as this staunch rationalist. Okay, so we've been talking a lot about laws and reason, but what about some of those other, big theological questions? Where does Saadya stand on things like God, creation, and the soul?
Well, his views on these fundamental concepts were deeply shaped by the intellectual landscape of his time. Remember, he was living in a world where Jewish, Christian, and Islamic thinkers were constantly engaging in debate and dialogue. And you can see those influences woven throughout his work.
So he wasn't just drawing from Jewish tradition. What were some of those other, key intellectual currents that were shaping his thought?
Well, one of the most prominent influences was Kalam, which was a school of Islamic theology that emphasized the use of reason to defend and understand religious doctrines. Saadya engaged very deeply with Kalam thinkers, both agreeing with and challenging their arguments.
Sounds like the 10th century was a pretty lively time for theological debate.
Yeah.
So how did all this influence Saadya's views on, say, the nature of God?
Well, he was a staunch defender of God's absolute unity, a concept that was central to both Judaism and Islam. He went to great lengths to refute any notion of God as having multiple parts or being in any way divisible. He even wrote a whole treatise arguing against the Christian doctrine of the Trinity.
It seems like he wasn't afraid to get into some, pretty heated theological disputes.
Not at all. He was passionate about defending his beliefs, and he wasn't shy about using reason and logic to support his arguments. And this comes through really clearly in his views on creation. Saadya was firmly in the camp of creatio ex nihilo, the idea that God created the world out of nothing.
Yeah, creatio ex nihilo. That's a concept that has always fascinated me. It's so mind-boggling to think about something coming from nothing.
It definitely challenges our everyday experience and our understanding of how things come to be. But for Saadya, creatio ex nihilo wasn't just a theological dogma. It was something he believed could be demonstrated through reason.
Hold up. He was trying to use logic to prove a religious belief. That seems like a tricky balancing act.
It is, but that's what makes Saadya so intriguing. He was constantly weaving together these different strands of thought,
Yeah.
reason and revelation, philosophy and theology. He believed that these different ways of knowing could ultimately complement and reinforce each other.
So how did he go about using reason to support this idea of creatio ex nihilo?
Well, he lays out a series of arguments, drawing on both scripture and philosophical reasoning. One of his key points is that if the world was created from some, pre-existing matter, then that matter would have to be eternal and independent of God. And that, for Saadya, was a direct challenge to God's absolute unity and sovereignty.
So to maintain God's absolute power and uniqueness, creation had to have happened out of nothing. It's like he's using a theological argument to support a philosophical concept.
Exactly. And it highlights how these different realms of thought were intertwined for Saadya. He wasn't simply trying to compartmentalize them, he was actively seeking points of convergence.
This is giving me a whole new perspective on how theological debates played out in the 10th century. It wasn't just about quoting scripture, it was about engaging in rigorous philosophical argumentation as well. So we talked about God and creation. What about Saadya's views on the human soul?
Well, his understanding of the soul is a fascinating blend of philosophical reasoning and scriptural interpretation. He seems to have been influenced by Plato's concept of the soul as a distinct entity, separate from the body and capable of existing independently.
Oh, a little bit of ancient Greek philosophy mixed in with Jewish theology. That's an interesting combination.
It is, and it shows how Saadya was drawing from multiple intellectual traditions to develop his own unique understanding of the soul. He also integrated Jewish beliefs about the afterlife and resurrection into his philosophical framework.
Okay, so a little bit of Plato, a little bit of Torah. How did that all come together?
While he even connects Plato's three-part model of the soul, reason, spirit, and appetite, with specific Hebrew terms for the soul found in Scripture. It's really impressive how he manages to weave these different traditions together.
He sounds like a master synthesizer, finding those hidden connections between seemingly disparate ideas. It's like he's creating this grand intellectual tapestry, you know, drawing from various sources to create a richer and more nuanced understanding of the human experience.
Exactly. And this brings us back to that core tension we've been exploring, right? The relationship between reason and revelation in Sadya's thought. Even though he emphasizes the power of reason to illuminate faith, there's a sense that revelation ultimately provides the foundation for his philosophical inquiries.
It's like reason is this incredible tool for understanding the world, but it needs the guidance of revelation to kind of point it in the right direction.
I think that's a beautiful way to put it. And perhaps it's a key to unlocking the enduring relevance of Saadya Gaon's work. Even though he lived over 1,000 years ago, the questions he grappled with, the nature of God, the role of reason in faith, the meaning of human existence, they're still so relevant today.
Absolutely. We're still wrestling with those same fundamental questions about faith, reason, and the search for meaning in a complex world. It's amazing to see how these ideas just transcend time and culture.
It's a testament to the enduring power of philosophy and theology to grapple with those big questions that continue to haunt and inspire humanity.
This has been an incredible journey so far. But of course, there's always more to explore. And it seems like Saadya Gaon just provides this treasure trove of insights that can enrich our own understanding of these fundamental questions.
He certainly does. And perhaps by delving deeper into his work, we can find some guidance for navigating our own journeys of faith and reason.
Wow, we've been on quite a journey with Saadya Gaon, exploring his life, his work, his intricate attempts to weave together reason and revelation. But now I'm curious, what are the lasting implications of all this? Why should we, in the 21st century, care about a 10th century Jewish philosopher?
Well, it's a great question, and I think it speaks to the enduring power of Sadia's ideas. What's fascinating is that he was grappling with issues that are still so relevant today. The tension between faith and reason, the role of tradition in a rapidly changing world, the search for meaning and purpose in the face of, complexity and uncertainty. These are challenges that continue to resonate with us centuries later.
It's like he was having a conversation that spans across time,
Mhm.
you know, addressing questions that are just fundamental to the human experience. But okay, even after this whole deep dive, I'm still wrestling with some things. We've talked about how Saadya championed the use of reason, but sometimes it feels like he's using reason more to justify his, pre-existing beliefs than to genuinely inquire into truth. Is that a valid criticism?
It's definitely a point of contention among scholars, and it reflects that inherent complexity of Saya's project. Some argue that he occasionally falls into the trap of what we've called, pseudo-reasoning, using logic to reinforce what he already believes, rather than as an independent tool for discovery. Others maintain that his commitment to reason was more genuine, that he truly believed in its power to illuminate even the most challenging aspects of faith.
Yeah, it's a tricky line to walk, isn't it? Trying to figure out where faith ends and reason begins. I guess that's what makes Saadya so intriguing, though. He wasn't afraid to grapple with those ambiguities, to embrace the tension between those two ways of knowing.
Right, and that's what makes his work so thought-provoking. Even for those who might disagree with his conclusions, right? He forces us to ask ourselves, how do we navigate that tension between faith and reason? What role does tradition play in our lives, especially in a world that's constantly pushing for innovation and change? How can we use our intellect to deepen our understanding of God, the universe, and our place in it all?
Man, if Saadya were here with us today, I'd be so curious to hear his take on the role of faith in a world that's increasingly dominated by science and technology. Would he see faith and reason as being in conflict, or could he envision a way for them to coexist and even enrich each other?
That's a brilliant question. And I think it gets to the heart of Saj's legacy. He reminds us that these aren't new questions. Humanity has been wrestling with these dilemmas for centuries, and each generation must find its own answers. But by engaging with the ideas of thinkers like Saadya, we can gain, valuable insights and perhaps even find new ways to bridge the gap between faith and reason in our own lives.
Yeah. He provides a model for how to engage with those big questions, to not shy away from the challenges that they pose. And maybe that's the most important takeaway from this whole deep dive. that the journey of faith and reason is an ongoing process, a constant kind of exploration and questioning.
Exactly. It's not about arriving at definitive answers, but about embracing the journey itself. The ongoing search for meaning and understanding. And Saadya Gaon, with his bold attempts to bridge that gap between reason and revelation, offers us a compelling example of how to navigate that journey.
Well said. And on that note, I think we'll wrap up our exploration of this remarkable thinker. But we leave you with this challenge, listeners. What would you ask Saadya Gaon if you had the chance? What insights from his work resonate most deeply with you? We encourage you to delve into his writings, explore his ideas, and see where your own journey of faith and reason takes you.
Yeah, it's a journey worth taking, and one that can lead to some really profound discoveries about ourselves, our world, and the ultimate mysteries of existence. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Saadya Gaon.
Until next time, keep those minds curious and those hearts open to the wonders of exploration and discovery. Thanks for listening.